Hello, 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 y'all. I am fortunate enough to have a very cool guest on today who hopefully you can learn a bunch from. And I know he can provide tons of value, and that's why I think it is fantastic for him to even be here. I'm not going to steal his thunder to do the intro. I'm going to let Brian do that himself. So, Brian, can you give yourself a little intro here?
I'd love to. First of all, I'll do it the way I always do on my email. Just start my priorities straight. It says Brian Biro, husband, father, grandfather, speaker, author. So that's the order. But I've been a professional speaker for 34 years. I had a blast, traveled all over the world, and spoken to almost a million people. I've just totaled it up, 1,900 events. I'm actually, as I speak to you today, I'm in Las Vegas at the Venetian, ready to speak tomorrow. So it's what I feel I was put on earth to do, so I love it.
That's powerful. And we're gonna be just super, genuine here. We don't have a script or anything. We're just gonna have a conversation, and what comes up, we're just gonna talk about. So, first question, you kind of going off that. You said you feel it is your purpose in being here. At what point in your speaking or speaker journey did you have that realization? Did you realize that?
That's a great question. I've had three careers. So my first, and they all led to what I've been doing for the last 34 years. My first career, I was a U.S. swimming coach. So I went to Stanford University. I had put my way through school, and I taught and coached swimming. And I realized as I was getting ready to graduate, I didn't love anything more than that, working with these young people to bring out the best in them. And that's really what I do as a speaker, is bring out the best in people. And of course, as a swimming coach, you got to develop your lungs because they can't hear you. Their heads are in the water. So I did that for 8 years. Loved it. Had a wonderful career. My team became very, very huge. Had 44 of my kids are in full college scholarships, but I had no life. All I had was work. And so, Ryan, I'm probably the only guy who went to graduate school to get a life instead of a job. And I did. I got actually both. That's when I met my wife. And that's when I got my MBA, went into the corporate world. And it was actually in my corporate career, I became a vice president of a pretty large transportation company all over North America. And we were so siloed and separated in the way we just didn't support each other. Operations hated sales, sales hated operations. They both hated the home office just a little bit more. So I that just didn't work with me. And so what I did was I started to develop team building training in my own company. And I loved it. We had an incredible turnaround. So at the peak of this phenomenal turnaround, I said to my wife, honey, we're doing great. Let's quit. And that's when I started speaking. And I think the biggest breakthrough, though, in speaking for me was realizing that most people, when they start out speaking, speak for the love. They want to get the love back. They want the standing ovation. They want the applause. And I had a realization, an epiphany one day when I was so interested in getting the evaluations and all that stuff. And I asked myself, is that really what I'm doing this for? And it hit me that no, what I do it for is because when I'm speaking, I feel like I'm doing what I was put on earth to do, that I'm actually fulfilling what I'm here for. And from that day, I never again asked for an evaluation. And from that day, I had even more energy speaking because it was what I could give rather than what I could get.
That's pretty cool. I think it's cool to hear. I'm fortunate enough to have the opportunity to talk to everyone from people like yourself that are, at the top of the game, the latter half of your speaking career, and then everyone in between, all the way to the aspiring speaker that just realized that their story can really actually help people and change lives, whether that's on the TEDx stage or, any other professional gig. What would you say was one realization when you made that pivot, right? Because I know and talk, I don't talk to these people, but see a lot of content on socials these days that talk about kind of the journey of entrepreneurship, right? And going from the start at uninformed optimism down to realizing, okay, this is not the total beauty I had in my head, to kind of realizing, oh, this is really tough, to then kind of coming out on the other end of the loop of the informed optimism when you've gone through the, the valley of despair or whatever you call it. What did that journey look like for you in kind of when you made that decision or had that realization that you just mentioned there?
I think the biggest realization that I had that really created that journey to be a little easier for me was at the lowest point in my life. I was going to Stanford University. I was a senior. I was trying to decide what the heck am I going to do with this thing called my life. And I felt kind of like a failure. My buddies all had these great relationships. They were going to medical school and law school. I'd been going to a great school, Stanford University. But I realized at that point that I had lived my entire life trying to be the best. Now, the best is all about comparing yourself to other people. And it's never good. When you're trying to be the best, you're never good enough. And came up from the way I was raised. My dad was one of those guys who had a hard time to say I love you or you're a great kid. And I had this epiphany where I realized this fruitless desire, searching to be the best, switched to one word switch, that my pursuit in life was simply going to be my best. That I started to, instead of comparing myself to others, I would just focus in on what I put in. And that was the transformation that made those three careers so strong. It was a feeling of, I don't know exactly what I'm going to do, but I'm going to do it. And in my speaking career, I've been really blessed. I am not a great self-promoter, which is not a great thing to be as a speaker. But luckily, virtually every one of my 1,900 events has come via word of mouth. So
Wow.
I love to talk about what I do. I just don't necessarily love to initiate that conversation. And so when I talk about it, the energy just flows out because I love it. I love it. And I love to get people in the game instead of on the sidelines. That's the only place you break through.
If you had to go back, knowing everything you know now, and talk to the Brian that made the decision to be a full-time professional speaker, with everything you know now, after all of the engagements you've been part of, and tell that Brian at that time, however many years ago it's been, I think you said 34 years you've been speaking. If you now could go talk to that Brian now, what would you tell that Brian at that time?
I would say right away, remember that you're going to be the best speaker possible when you forget about trying to be perfect. You focus on what you can give rather than what you can get. I would have gone through that first couple of years. I was just like everybody else, trying to get the applause, trying to get those evaluations. I would have moved right beyond that, and I would have not much else I would have changed because I've loved every minute of it. I've had to change and adapt through time. When I began speaking, Ryan, the average presentation was at least a full day,
Wow.
and we're in a TEDx world of 12 to 18 minutes. I still speak for as a usually the opening or closing speaker at an event, anywhere from 45 minutes to 2 hours. But that's quite a switch from a full day to that amount of time. And
Yeah.
so you have to learn a lot of things. And I guess the other thing I would say is when you first start out, you try to tell everybody everything you know. So you're like a fire hose. But if you try to drink from a fire hose, all you do is get thirsty. And so I would have gone with the KISS principle, keep it simple, superstar. Over time, I've tried to focus on simpler, fewer points. And as a result, I think it helps people more because they can grab a hold of one or two or three key principles or ideas or stories. But if you try to give them 50 of them, they don't remember any of them.
Hmm. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but you've given a TEDx talk before, right?
I have not. I've
You
trained
have not.
speakers. I've
Right.
trained
Okay.
I've trained some who were already good speakers, but trying to learn how to adapt to that different kind of a format. And I've taken a couple of people who had never spoken, who were and they had great stories. I'm definitely a storyteller. Stories are the most powerful key to speaking. There's three things. One, be yourself. Two, be a great storyteller. And I've actually done a lot of study of what makes stories so powerful, and it's something called neural coupling. And it's actually part of the way our brains work, is that when we are telling a story, our brains are lit up exactly the same way as the listener. And so that's
Hmm.
why tell somebody a great story. Somewhere along the line, it shifts from being your story to their story. They see their family, they see their challenges, they see their breakthroughs. And that's where you help people move from their heads to their hearts. So stories, all right, being yourself. And for me, the other is engagement, getting people to actually do. See, when we hear, we forget. When we see, yeah, we're more likely to remember. But it's only when we do that we understand. And so that's why I love that I still have 45 minutes to 2 hours rather than 12 minutes, because I can get people in the game. And I'm known as America's breakthrough speaker because I get people to break boards karate style as a metaphor of breaking through. So I have not delivered a TED talk. I have done talks of that short, but I loved it. Some of my stories are, more than the TED talk time.
Right. And so how many TEDx speakers have you coached at this point? Sounds like it's been a few.
5 or 5. I've taught a few other people about professional speak to do more of what I do. But these happen to be people who came to me and said, "What do I do? What do I do?" And of
Hmm.
course, when TEDx talk, the worst thing you do is be a fire hose. You got to keep it really clear, simple, on target. Make sure that and that's the challenge for most people, because they want to say too much. And as a result, they say too little.
Right. And you just mentioned two different kinds of people, right? Or I guess they're similar people, but different challenges and opportunities that they're having at that time when they're talking to you. You talked about the professional speaker that comes to you saying, "Hey, Brian, help me out with this professional speaking thing. I like it, but I don't really know how to businessify it." That's a thing you can say. And then you talk about the TEDx speaker that they haven't given the TEDx talk yet, but they've been accepted and now they're in training time, right? So let's start with the professional speaker. When those professional speakers come to you where they've, kind of dipped their toe in the water, but they are kind of in that fire hose mode where it's like, oh my gosh, there's all this. Then I have to, set my speaking fee, and then I have to go find the gigs, and then I have to do all the business of it. Then I have to build a team, and I have to build a marketing team to promote my stuff, to get more speaking gigs, all that kind of stuff. What is normally what you tell those people when they come to you for that advice?
Well, the first thing I do is they got to master their craft. I mean, nothing's going to go forward until they really work on the talk. So, if you market before you have mastered your craft, you're not gonna build word of mouth, because all marketing in speaking has to become word of mouth eventually. It has to be. You have to create that energy that comes from your presentation. So the first thing we do is work on that presentation, and in a great talk, a great professional speaker, whether they're doing a TED talk or they're doing a longer talk, you got to do feet, heart, head. All right. The feet is establishing, like, the best way to put it is in terms of a story arc. The feet is the part of the story where it's kind of the cinematography. Who is doing what, when, where, how, creating enough of a picture that neural coupling thing we talked about, where people start to relate to you, can get a hold of it and feel like, oh, I'm there with you. If you do too much, you lose them. You do too little, they're not engaged enough. So the first thing we got to make sure in their presentation is that there's enough feet in their stories that people are connecting to it. The heart is where I find more professional speakers need work. And that is, if you don't feel the heart of the story is where everything changes. It's where the nickel drops, where as you're listening to the story, you tear up or you laugh out loud. It's where that emotion is absolutely generated. And if you don't feel your own story, if you don't feel a passion about your own story, how's the audience going to feel it? And some people are either too far over the edge or too far under the edge. We got to get right to the edge, so that, I'm kind of an emotional guy. I watch, at this time of year, we watch It's a Wonderful Life. I've watched it 40 times, the Christmas movie. I cry every time. I cry at openings of supermarkets. But when I tell my stories, I feel them, but I won't go over the edge. And then the head part is another part that people miss out on, because when you're doing a talk, if you don't come back and loop it back to give people the message, to give people the moral of the story, the principle, the key thoughts, then what you've done is create an emotion, but now they can't use it in their life. What that head part is to take that what you've given them and make sure you solidify it with something they can grab a hold of and take into their life tomorrow, next week, next year, for the rest of their lives. So the first thing we do is we work on their talk. Once we've done that, okay, then I have them actually do the talk just to me. The hardest thing you can do is do a presentation to one person who you know is evaluating you. Uh, because you're not getting feedback from all over the room with people laughing or crying or paying attention. And during that time, that's where I'm paying attention. Are they doing the feet, heart, head? What I love about doing work with speakers is when I'm delivering the speak, I'm in charge. I know where we're going. I know what time it's going to take. I mean, it's not that I memorize it, but it's a part of me. I've got it down. I've done it so many times and it's who I am. When I'm doing work with a speaker, it's the opposite. I don't know where we're going to go until they present, but we always find that key distinction that can take them from good to great, that can take them from potential to actual performance.
Mm. It's interesting you mentioned you know it. You've got it down. When I talk to my clients a lot of times, I tell them my story, how I my first TED Talk, I got up on the TEDx stage. I thought I had the entire script memorized. I get up there, say the first two words, and then my brain goes blank. I forget the entire script, the 5 pages that I had memorized, the 12 minutes of it. And they say, "Well, how did you do it?" I said, "Well, because it was a life story, I didn't have it memorized." And I asked them, "What's your name?" And they'll tell me, like, for you, you say Brian. I say, "Do you have that memorized or do you know it?" And they're like, "Oh, okay, that makes sense. You know it. It's so ingrained in your body and your knowledge that it comes. It's like homeostasis where you breathe air. You don't even think about breathing air; it just happens." So it was interesting how you mentioned that kind of saying you got it down.
That's brilliant. And that allows you to do something that only the best speakers do, and that is to be fully present. See, what I love if being fully present means 100% of your mind, body, and spirit is with the people you're with where they are now. So if you're thinking about what's coming 5 minutes from now, you're not present. If you're thinking about what the audience reaction is, you're not fully present. And when you are fully present, though, people get it. They get that you are absolutely 100% with them. And that's when the magic happens. And here's what happens. I bet you've had this experience. I'm a little bit unusual in the way that I have my clients prepare the room, and that I like it to be much lighter than a lot of speakers do. I don't want the spotlight so much on me that I can't see people. I love to see people's faces. But what happens is when you're fully present, you'll feel it almost feels like somebody invisibly grabs your head and you say a point to somebody in the audience and you know it's for them. You don't know them. I mean, there's 1,000 people, but something tells you that, and that only happens when you're fully present, that this moment is what you're here for today. And then you move to the next one. And that's when something pops in your head. See, when you know something, you may have said it 1,000 times. When something new pops out, it's like, and that can only happen when you're fully present. That's when you get really excited. In fact, I usually joke about it. If something comes out of my mouth that I've never even thought of quite that way before, somebody please write that down. I don't know where that came from. And that's one of the best moments as a professional speaker.
You mentioned being fully present. When you mentioned that, I want to ask you this question because before I heard a lot about this, it seemed really foreign to me. But then it ties in nicely with kind of what you're saying. So I was at this conference called Funnel Hacking Live in Orlando. This was a few months back, so 2023. And I was at a dinner with someone with a bunch of entrepreneurs. They're super cool people, very inspirational. And one of them, he asked me a question. He said, Ryan, at which emotions do you think you operate in your highest frequency, your highest vibration that you can operate in as a human? And I said, first guess, I said love. He said no. I said gratitude. He said no. He said the frequency that you operate, the highest frequency you can operate in as a human is authenticity. And I was like, that makes so much sense because it's almost like you're in full alignment with everything. And the words you say, the energy you're emitting, the energy you're giving people, you feel that from head to toe in your body and in every cell it's there. So is that, when you say being fully present and talking about that, is that what you're referring to, fully present in yourself?
Absolutely. And when you're fully present in yourself, that says to the people out there that they're important. Whenever you're fully present, it says to the people, you matter, you count, you're important. But that can only come when you're fully present with yourself. And you hit the word that I think is the one that creates that authenticity or comes with that authenticity, and that's energy. Energy is to everyone we touch, our energy is our example. People won't remember that much of what we say, no matter how well we say it, but they'll never forget our energy. And that's really, when you think about it, that, the Banner study on communication was done at UCLA many, many years ago. And what it did is that it looked at the three parts of communication. There is body language, so not what we say with our words or our mouth, but what we're saying with our body language. The second is tonality, so that's not what we say, but how we say it. And the third is words. You've probably heard of this study before, but 55% of communication is not anything that comes out of our mouth, it's body language. 38% is not the words we say, it's tonality. And only 7% are the words. So what we're mostly communicating is our energy, both through the energy coming out of our voice and the energy coming out of our bodies. And what I love, I joke about it, but it's the truth. I say when I'm on stage, I'm 25. I get off stage, sometimes I'm 69 again, but on stage I'm 25. And you'll laugh at this, but it's happened before. Having been around so long, 34 years of speaking, I've had a handful of times, maybe a few more, where I was really sick. I mean, I had, one, I had my heart was racing. I had a 105 temperature. I was sick as a dog until I got on stage. Spoke the whole time, full love, full energy, got off stage, and I was sick as a dog again. But in that time, I wasn't sick at all because the energy was fully, so completely, authentically present there that there wasn't any room to think about being sick. And that's happened the few times I've ever been sick. That has happened to each and every time. And that is really what comes across as energy. What I would say for every speaker out there is ask yourself that question, two questions about energy. One, look at your energy on a 10-point scale, with one comatose, 10 a child on Christmas morning, 10 the way you feel when you just knocked it out of the park. Question number one, I call it the $1 trillion question. When you look at that 10-point energy scale from 1 to 10, where have you been living your life? And unless that answer is awful close to 10, all right, then you got to adjust that if you're going to be any good on the stage. And then ask yourself, where are you on that 10-point scale on stage? And if they're different, then you're not really authentic off stage or on stage. So, and there's two ways that we elevate energy by choice instead of chance. The first is so simple we miss it, is energy is created by the way that you move. Anytime you've been at your best, you've given your best presentation, you've been your most understanding, you've been your most present, you've moved your body differently than when you haven't been your best. And the second, which is even more powerful, in fact, movement will come from it, is that the level of your energy is in direct proportion to your level of purpose. If you ever want proof of that, there's a wonderful book called Man's Search for Meaning. It's an old book. It's written by Viktor Frankl, and it's a story of his existence in the Nazi concentration camp. He was Jewish. He was in Auschwitz. And he said, the people who survived were the people who had a purpose left undone. In other words, they had a child to get back to. They had work they felt only they could do. And what that says, if we're not inspired, we're expired. And so if you don't feel enough about your speaking, go to your purpose. What are you doing it for? And if that purpose isn't strong enough, you're not going to have the energy you want to portray.
Wow. For Well, first I'll say I think it's amazing to hear kind of what you're talking about, because a lot of these things, at least for me, they were simply assumptions, right? But then you're coming here and you're saying, well, in my 34 years of experience, that's exactly what happened. So you have the evidence, the anecdotal evidence of actually what happened. So it's super cool to kind of hear you talk about it and validate that. It can seem kind of woo-woo-y of, frequencies and the vibration of the cells in your body and all that kind of stuff. But when you talk about the energy and all that kind of stuff, it's like, maybe not. Maybe it can sound woo-woo-y, but maybe it's actually very scientific. So it's interesting to hear that from you. For the TEDx speakers that you've coached, what would you say are some of the key points and key pieces of value that you deliver to them that make the difference between their talk being, a 10 out of 10 versus a 2 out of 10? What would you say that value is?
Well, I think that there's a couple of things we talked about before. Number one is keep it simple, superstar. Is that you gotta get down. If you can't tell the person who's coaching you what your 1, 2, or at the max 3 main points that you want to convey in short little phrases, you're not ready to deliver that talk. So the starting place is know your end in mind. Have the end in mind. What are you there to convey? And have it be concise and clear. And that's your starting place. And anything that goes around it or above it or beyond it is going to be kind of fluff. It's not going to be value. Secondly, is you got to really, really reach down and get into the emotion. A TEDx talk that's just information is just information. Forbes did a study in 2016 where they asked the question, what's the difference of impact when a message is delivered through a story versus just the data? It was 22 times more power from a story, same information, than just the data. 22 times. That's a big number.
Wow.
1,200%. All right. So if you don't have a powerful story in your TED talk, it's just a talk. They should change it to the TED story. That's what they really should call it. So to me, the two key things are keep it simple, or three things. Keep it simple, know your key points and stay with them, and make sure you're telling a powerful story that is going to reach beyond the head down into the heart.
The next question I'm going to ask is for the business owners that are speakers at the same time. They're running the business, but it's not one of their businesses is a speaking business, but they have, one or two other businesses that are their main thing, right? The speaking is just more of a passion project, makes, few extra bucks a month, and they enjoy it. It fulfills them, right? So they choose to do it. What would you tell that person that's managing, maybe a coaching business and marketing their book and managing the 9 to 5 at the same time, or all these things that they're doing? What would you tell them that you think they should know that might be helpful for them to hear from you, having gone through an experience like that?
Well, I think the first thing that they need to do is really determine why they want to do that speaking and make sure that they're clear about their purpose so that when they're speaking, they're all in on their speaking, that they're not trying to multitask, because then it's going to come over that way. So whatever portion of your business and your entrepreneurship is in speaking, when you're doing it, you're all in. So number one, make sure that you're full out energy. Number two, that you do the same things you do if you were a full-time professional speaker. You master that to where you're not thinking about it. If you don't know it, the way you put it before was absolutely brilliant. When you know it, then you can be fully present and your energy will flow through. So I would say to them, make sure you have really gotten clear about why you want to do the speaking. And if it's just for not a really deep, impactful reason to help people, you probably shouldn't be doing it. All right. But figure out why you're doing it. All right. Then master that craft. And one other thing that I will say to people that is an undervalued aspect of speaking, whether it's any one of the three groups we talked about, the new TEDx speaker, the professional speaker, or the entrepreneur business owner speaking, ask some questions when you're speaking. Questions are the other key way to engage people because it brings it home for them. In other words, you don't know what's going on in their life. You don't know what their goals are, but you can ask them, how would this affect your family? What does this mean to you? Basically, you're asking them, what does this mean to you? Often through the program. So they just stop listening and they start really, really working through it in their own minds. And now they're connected to you. So a lot of times we think speaking is just about telling. Asking is a powerful ingredient in being a great speaker as well.
I think that's a good point because you're almost impacting them on, or I guess connecting to their physiology, I guess would be the term, in the term you used before. I think it was
Neural
neural
coupling,
some
neural
neural
coupling.
coupling. So neural
Exactly.
coupling to your story, and then kind of attaching them of, okay, I'm already hooked. This is why this is important to me because I can see it will directly correlate to this in my own life. Okay, now I'm going to listen. This is, okay. Yeah, it makes sense.
That's why
And
I do,
then,
that's why I do the board breaking. Why I'm known for that. I've had like 1 million people over the last 34 years break boards. At the end of my programs, I want people to emerge from the program as the stars of the show. And every event you speak at, one of the major outcomes that people are going to have is for them to go out and do something different in their life. Do it, whether it's to do it better. In other words, everyone goes to an event for a breakthrough. That's why people watch TEDx talks, to learn something they can put into their own life. And so to me, the breakthrough experience is the coolest, most magnificent combination, individual and team experience, because you don't know you can do it until you do it. And when they walk out, they go, whoa, I did that. What else could I do in my life that I didn't know I could do?
are you familiar with a speaker named Alex Hormozy?
Nope.
So he said something that kind of reframed how I approached certain events when I would go to those events where there were speakers. And what he said was, if you go to an event that you pay for, whether it's a business or personal development or something like that, and your behavior doesn't change after the event, there's nothing that you change about the way you were going about things previously, you're throwing your cash away because it doesn't make sense to spend that money to have that potential change. Then nothing changes. You're not getting any ROI. In order to get your ROI on the actual event, something needs to change, and you wouldn't be there if you weren't looking to change something. So that's it's interesting that you mentioned that as well with the breakthrough. It seems like the point of your events is to break through, to change something. Do people come to your events? Kind of like, what's, I guess, this, I don't want to say the sales journey or the marketing process, but what is the narrative or the assumptions that they're coming, that they have in their head and that they're preparing for when they are showing up to your events? Are they, I'm ready to break through, I'm ready to do something and change something, or what does that normally look like for them?
I'm primarily and have been a corporate speaker. So I speak for organizations that bring me in, as opposed to events where people are paying out of their own pocket. So in some ways, that's a little more challenging, because if you've got your own skin in the game, you darn well want to come and get something, learn something. Uh, so that adds to the impact, because one thing I always do, I don't care if you're talking to a complete business audience, talk about your family, talk about those, go beyond just the workplace. We're one person. If somebody gets inspired to be a better dad, it's going to make them a better in their work as well. If somebody's inspired to be a better person in their profession, they'll probably be a better dad if the principles are the same, which they are. So to me, I have the people coming to my events are really mixed. Some are like, I'm ready to go. I'm ready. They're like, they've got their skin. Some are like, oh, the company's paying for it, I guess I better show up here. And so then it's up to me to give them everything I can. I can't control what they're going to do, but I can put my heart and soul. And my promise to every audience I've ever spoken for is, I'm going to give you everything I've got, because I feel like I'm doing what I was put on earth to do. And what they do with it, that's why when people say, well, you're a motivational speaker, and I say, thank you, I'm a motivated speaker. The motivation has got to be internal.
And what have you learned about the business of speaking as far as negotiating speaking fees, as far as, choosing to do corporate as opposed to more individual events? What have you learned about that whole part of speaking as you've gone through it? And then you've gone through it and it's been 34 years. It's evolved over time, I'm sure. And so kind of how has the business of speaking evolved over time in your experience?
Well, first of all, when I'm working with people who are just starting out to want to speak, I say there's not really a science to setting your fees, other than to set your fees initially at something you'd feel good at, but you also feel like they're getting great value, and then earn it. Then earn it. When I started out, my fees have gone way up over time, but never out of proportion to where demand fell off. My basis was always on, when I can do the set number of events per month that I want to do, All right. And I'm getting more, people interested in me than I can handle. It's time to raise my fees. I think that the decision as to whether you want to go the corporate route or you want to go the paid event kind of thing, I think that really has more to do with um, kind of your level of what kind of sales you like to do. As I said, I'm not a big. It's hard for me to toot my own horn about my speaking. I'd rather have somebody else toot it. And so I've been. I would say this: if you're going the corporate route, get out there and speak at events that are what I call seed events. Example: I spoke 3 times at an event called the Women's Food Service Forum. That has about 2,000 women from the food industry who are director level and above. I actually got less than my normal fees to do those events, but I've had at least 500 events for full pay as a result of doing those events. That's where the seeds were planted to start that word of mouth. Ultimately, remember this: whichever way you do, it's the word of mouth that you're trying to generate through your social media marketing, through whatever direct sales you're doing. Because if people aren't talking about you, that marketing is going to fade away.
So then you kind of touch on the marketing side of the business, right? How much of did it go from a point for you when it went from all cold outbound outreaches and a little bit of word of mouth to when it became all word of mouth? And then what did that balance look like from outbound marketing to you have such a solid set of content that markets you enough where people will come and warm inbound leads come and say, hey, Brian, we saw you here. We think you'd be perfect for our event. And then we talked to 3 other people that have already seen you live, and that just confirmed our decision. When did it get to that point? And then kind of how did you go about it at first when you were first trying to secure those gigs?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I'm not the best person to answer it because of the fact that I was very blessed and that some of the very first events I spoke at way back when, before you were born, probably, were for Inc. magazine international conferences. And those events were my first seed events. And so very early on, I had to do outbound reach to get into those Inc. events. I did 4 of them. They brought 45 speakers and they rated the speakers. And I was lucky enough to be rated the #1 guy. That set my path. From there on out, I was really all word of mouth. Very, I can't think of more than 10 events in my life of the 1900 where I did outbound after those events.
Wow.
And a
And
good example, I'm also known for I've done 99 events for Lockheed Martin, one company. They have 175,000 employees. And so when you get into an organization like that, they have so many different groups within that organization. That that's been I've 99 events for them, 42 events for Microsoft, 34 events for Starbucks, 65 events for Kaiser Permanente. So once I was in there, it was word of mouth within that organization.
wow, what are some of the that's amazing. Lockheed Martin, I mean, that's a huge company. The fact you've done 99, you said 99 gigs at Lockheed Martin. And then Starbucks, who doesn't know what Starbucks is? That's it. And then Microsoft too. What would you say are some of the most other, I guess, notable companies that you're doing these events, or are you giving the events, or are you just going to speak, or what does that kind of look like with a corporate gig of that size?
Yeah, I get booked by that organization or through a speakers bureau. So speakers bureaus today have evolved in that, when I first started, speakers bureaus were the direct contact with the client. Nobody could there weren't websites. People didn't go to websites to find out a speaker. So that's changed. Now, great speakers bureaus, their relationship is with the end client so that the end client trusts in them so much to go out and find a great speaker. So whether it's a direct with an organization, as all of those are, or with a speakers bureau, they book me. They come to me and book me, and we set up a contract, and off we go. And that's a lovely, wonderful way to do it. If it's with the speakers bureau, they do the contracting, and I'm sort of the contractor. If it's direct, I send them a direct contract, and off we go.
And I know we're kind of running over here, but for so different companies have different cultures. And so I say this because my question is, it's more just of something that I'm interested in. What have you noticed at different companies, different reactions and different engaging, like certain companies, teams connected better with your conferences and your speaking than other companies? And then why do you think that is, that that group connected particularly well as opposed to this company, and the people at this company didn't connect all that well? What would you say
Yeah.
about that?
Well, I've been awful lucky in that, you know, because I get people into the game there's certainly groups that are more wary in the beginning of the presentation. By the end, they all come around. So that's been a real plus. Every event is different, and that's the fun of it. That's the creativity of it. I don't deliver the same event 1900 times. It's it starts by having a conversation with the end client and asking them, what are your most desired outcomes? What's going on with your people right now? What's their state of mind? What are your goals for this year? What are your challenges? And so whenever I'm connecting with an organization, it starts by listening. And because when I started out, I had, you know, sometimes 3-day events, I have a lot of material. I have a lot to draw from. And as I'm listening to their desired outcomes, I'm listening to where their people are right now, what's clicking is, oh, this is the right story, this is the right this is vital that they have this one's not as important. And so it's formulating the game plan for that particular organization, which makes each one a creative process. And by that customization, that's the other key thing that's going to make it rare that you don't connect with that particular audience. Now, there's a difference between listening and asking questions like, what's your desired outcome, and trying to pretend you know their business as well as they do. That always comes over to me as phony when a speaker's trying to pretend they know exactly the language of that organization, rather than just what I know is people. What I know is what inspires. And when I listen, that's what I'm looking for, and not trying to pretend that I know the ins and outs of their business that they do every day. But by hitting those key points I've asked through that conversation, that's first all about listening. The customization really gets away from the kind of up and down with the audiences to where they're all feeling like, hey, this guy was here for us.
I love that. And then you mentioned before we kind of started recording here, you have 16 books published. Is that right? And so I was having a conversation with a speaker earlier, and he'd just gotten accepted to a TEDx talk, a TED talk, and him and I were talking about how there are different layers of credibility to, speaking and being a speaker. And he was talking about, we were just, pondering what does it look like when you add a book to your, internal credibility layer, I guess you would call it that. What did that look like for you, and once you started publishing and writing books, how did that affect your speaking?
Well, I look at books as two things that really help me with my speaking. Number one, writing a book, the process of writing a book that you're passionate about is taking what I call percolator stuff. Things are percolating, but you've never connected them to that fine point to where you're communicating it in an elegant or an emotional or a powerful fashion. So it helps you with your delivery eventually, because you've thought it through at a whole different level to write it to where you feel really good about it. You know, and that's the way I write. Is I write to 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 feel good about what I write. I read it to myself, and if it doesn't sound good to me, I'm going to keep writing until it sounds good. If I don't feel the impact of a story I've written, it's not good enough. So the one hand is in terms of the delivery and the content. The other is that I see books. Yes, they do create a credibility. You wrote a book. Oh my gosh. You know, my first book, Beyond Success, the great coach John Wooden wrote the foreword to the book, and it's done really, really well over a long time. So it adds a measure of, oh, he wrote a book. Maybe he knows what he's talking about. All right. But the big thing to me is it's another seed planter. I don't know for a fact that my books have generated gigs, but I'm pretty sure they have. And I'm pretty sure they've helped. And so by putting those books out there, I wrote the books for the same reason that I speak, which is to deliver stuff I love, to deliver impactful information that I think can help people in their lives, in their business, in their health, in their spirit, and their families. And I believe every time I do that, that's a seed planting that is going to go somewhere. There's somebody may talk about my book and, oh, he's a speaker, that I'll never know that it derived from that book, but I believe it does.
That's interesting. It is also interesting to see, the kind of the different layers of credibility that can be added to your, speaker brand through those kinds of things, through giving a TED talk, through having a book written, through testimonials, through, in your case, word of mouth. So you having seen kind of the speaking industry over the past 34 years, you've seen trends come and go. You've seen how it's ebbed and flowed. You've seen it grow and then lack thereof in some moments, I'm sure. Seeing these trends and how the industry has developed over the past 34 years, what do you see happening with the speaking industry over the next 5 to 10 years?
That is a really, really great question. That is, I think about from time to time, because I've always said I'll keep speaking as, it's a gig you can keep doing as long as I'm relevant, right? As long as I'm healthy. If I do have those two things going, because I love what I do, I'll keep doing it. But where's it going? Well, one thing for sure, speaking is the time element has changed a great deal through those years. As I said, I started at 3-day events. Now it's, sometimes 30 minutes. And so the first thing is that you're going to need to be clear. We live in a world where social media is quick, where, messages are much quicker, where Gen Z wants it quick. So I think that's going to continue. I think that, there's more of a tendency, and I'm not sure that I'm built for this part, but there's much more focus on more glitzy visuals than there used to be. Using all, way beyond PowerPoint, but adding, cartoons, adding special effects, creating almost a show. And I think that's going to continue for certain speakers. What I don't think is going to change is the power of stories. And I think that if you've got a powerful story, and if you know how to tell a great story, and I also believe that if you don't get people off the sidelines and into the game, that that the industry is going to move more towards more engagement rather than less engagement. The days of just sitting back and applauding a speaker at the end don't make it anymore. If people can't get in there and do something, mind, body, and spirit, I think that the tendency of the future is going to be more engagement. So I'm set up good for that and the stories, maybe not so much for the flashy visuals.
That's interesting, especially when you're saying the flashy visuals. So I've been working in for a hybrid tech agency. I'm still in part of it, and just seeing trends in tech, it's always interesting to me to see those kinds of things because it's so cutting edge and so new in ways that I cannot even fathom at times. And so it's always interesting for me to see, okay, how could tech combine with speaking? Is it, you know, augmented reality in speaking? Is it, what is it? How does tech get included in the speaking industry? I know you're probably, I don't know if you get still like paid in cash, whereas maybe, 34 years ago they'd pay you for a gig in cash. I don't even know, but those kinds of things just kind of evolve everything with the speaking industry. What would you, as the last kind of point here, because we could drown on this stuff forever. What would you want to leave the audience of professional speakers, of TEDx speakers, of aspiring speakers, of business owners that are balancing speaking and business at the same time, seeing how speaking can be such an asset for their positioning and marketing for social media content, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, or X, I guess, all of those kind of things combining? What would you say to all of those people that seems like you've kind of been through it all and you are where you are now successfully?
Yeah, I would say that the most important message I deliver in my events is the same one I deliver to speakers, and it's kind of a big part of our conversation today. Is it's about that authenticity and being present. That, to me, the biggest distinction to a speaker who's going to impact people is that they are genuine and authentic, that they allow themselves to get vulnerable enough when they tell a story to feel that story themselves, to not be afraid to talk about your mistakes, and what you learn from it. Um, Not just your mistakes. If you didn't learn from it, it does no value whatsoever. To recognize that when you are coming from that place of full out authenticity, being fully present, your energy is going to soar. And to everyone we touch, our energy is our example. So those are the things that ultimately will impact people to take whatever you have to deliver and do something in their life. If it's just information, it'll flow right out their ears. I always joke and say, if it's only in their head, we got all these holes in our head, stuff falls out. Got to get in your bloodstream. And that only comes from authenticity, presence, and energy.
Beautiful. Well, I will wrap it up here and end the recording here. Thank you for listening, and Brian, I'm glad we had the chance to have this conversation.
Well, Ryan, you're awesome. Thanks for the work you do. Have a great, great, great life, career, Christmas, holiday, whatever. Take care.
Thank you. Cheers.